Hey everybody, it's Booray Perry from Tampa, Florida, and in this episode of Booray Explains, we are going to talk about f-stop and f-stop values. And you just need to buckle up for this one. Because up until now in this series of videos, we've been talking about concepts that are pretty easy to explain and not incredibly confusing. If you haven't watched from the beginning, especially if you're a new photographer, go back and watch from the beginning because you're going to really learn a lot. And I try to do this in a particular order so that I don't use terms when I'm explaining something that I haven't already explained in previous videos. But when you get to f-stop, this is when the wheels start to come off the wagon. So first, let's just recap a little bit. We talked about ISO and what ISO means, and ISO numbers. So your ISO is expressed by ISO numbers, and the bigger that number is, the more sensitive your camera is to light. So effectively, an ISO number, when it gets bigger, your picture becomes brighter. Make sense? An ISO of 100 gives you one picture, an ISO of 200 gives you a picture that's twice as bright. Perfect. Shutter speed. Shutter speed is expressed in fractions. So if someone says that they're using a shutter speed of 250, what they really mean is the shutter speed is 1/250th of a second. So when a shutter speed number gets bigger, your picture actually gets darker. It's the exact opposite from ISO. So if you have a shutter speed of 250 and you go to shutter speed of 500, you just went from 1/250th of a second to 1/500th of a second. The shutter is going to be open for a smaller amount of time, and you're only getting half as much light in the camera. So as the shutter speed number goes up, the picture gets darker. I say that as long as you're expressing the shutter speed in whole numbers. So 250 is twice as much as 125. However, if you're expressing the shutter speed in fractions, then technically it's not going up, because you're not going up when you go from 1/125th to 1/250th. That's actually a smaller number. 1/250th is a smaller number than 1/125th. Yeah, right. So already you're starting to lose it, right? But most of the time, I mean, sometimes people will express. They'll say, "What's your shutter speed? 1/60th." They'll say or something like that. But a lot of times they just shorthand it, and they'll say, "What's your shutter speed? 60." I do. What's your shutter speed? 250. That's what I say. And I assume the person who's asking me the question understands that I mean 1/250th of a second. And this is kind of what these videos are about, are making it so that you understand this too, so you can understand this and learn and talk to photographers. Okay, so that's shutter speed. Here we go. I'm taking a sip now because now this is like a warm-up. Aperture. When it comes to math and numbers, I love algebra. And I love logic. I have a stopping point, and that stopping point is pi. When you throw a formula at me and it somehow involves pi, I check right out. I'm done. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to have to deal with pi. Okay, I understand X and Y and logic and okay, but pi, no. I haven't dealt with pi since high school. I don't want to start dealing with pi now. And when it comes to aperture values in your camera and defining those values, they're defined in f-stop numbers, and that formula uses pi. So we're going to stay away from that formula and try and keep it simple. First, a little bit of history that I think is cool. The reason it's called f-stop is because back in the days when they had lenses that didn't actually have, you couldn't dial them in, you couldn't change the aperture of the lens electronically, you actually had to put this plate into the lens. So the lens had an opening, and then you would drop this plate right in front of the opening, and that plate would have a hole in it. That plate would stop the light from coming into the camera. The F, by the way, stands for focal length. It has to do with the focal length of the inside of the lens. We're not going to go into that here. We don't want to overload it. But it's f-stop. It was stopping the light that comes into the camera. Make sense? Okay. So now we can adjust the aperture just by turning a dial on the camera, and we can change the aperture. And it is expressed by an f-stop number, and that f-stop number represents a formula that has to do with the diameter of the lens and pi. What's important to know is this. It is basically a fraction. Just like with shutter speed, it is basically a fraction, and it is a fraction that is never expressed as a fraction. So, the bigger the number, the smaller the opening. This is where it starts to throw people. Remember, with ISO, the bigger the number, the brighter the picture. With shutter speed, the bigger the number, the darker the picture. Unless you're expressing it as a fraction, in which case, it's the opposite. And with aperture, the bigger the number, the darker the picture. The hole gets smaller as the number gets bigger. f22 is a small hole. f2 is a very big hole. It goes against your brain. You would think, well, the bigger hole is going to be 22, not 2. But it's a fraction, right? So 1/22 is smaller than 1/2. If you think of it that way, if you make that connection, okay. So you will hear people say, I'm going to stop down. Stop down. When they say stop down, they mean the hole is going to get smaller. It's confusing. Stop down. That means the number gets bigger, the hole gets smaller. Right? Would have been so much easier if they just given you like whole numbers, just kick the fractions out and just give you whole numbers. Like someone should just build like a camera for dummies, and instead of having all these fractions, it would just be 1, 2, 4, 8 for everything, for shutter speed, for everything. But they don't. They use the actual numbers because it's very technical. Our art form is very technical and very scientific, so they have to use the actual numbers. I've got to take another sip now. Hang on. So, wrap your head around it. Live it, love it, learn it, right? The bigger the number is, the smaller the hole. If someone says they're stopping down, then the hole is getting smaller. So if you're at f16 and you want to stop down, you go to f22. You go up with the number in order to make the hole get smaller. Right? This is when you quit, right about now. Right? This is when you got, I thought photography was fun, taking pictures of my cat, and it was great. And I thought I'd just be more involved in photography. And this guy, Booray, seems nice, and he can explain some of this stuff to me. And then you get to this video, and you're like, F this. Oh, my God. And let me tell you, there's more to come. But this is where it starts. This is where the wheels start to come off the wagon when it comes to easily understanding photography. So there's two concepts to keep in mind here. One is how aperture works and how those numbers work. And the other one is the concept of a stop. Because people will use this term all the time. Not just when they're referring to aperture. They also use it when they're referring to shutter speed and we're talking to ISO. They'll just say, change your camera by a stop. I need a stop of more light. Every time they say that, what they mean is they want you to double or cut in half the amount of light coming into the camera, because that's what a stop is. A stop is either twice as much or half as much, depending on which way you're going. So if you say, give me a stop of more light, then you can get a stop of more light by changing anything in the exposure triangle. Now here is where you're really going to get mad. With your ISO, a stop of light is anytime you double the number or you cut the number in half. With your shutter speed, a stop of light is anytime you double the number or you cut the number in half. With your aperture, that's not true. When you double the number of your aperture, that's 2 stops of light. If you cut the number in half, that's 2 stops of light. You calm down. It's all right. It's going to be okay. If you can get this, if you can wrap your head around this, literally you're like halfway home to being a photographer. Because I personally believe this is the biggest hurdle right here, is understanding that aperture and those stupid numbers that they use and the way that they figure them and the fact that it's completely different than the numbers that they use for the other 2 things in the exposure triangle. This is the biggest hurdle to being a photographer. So if you are at f4 and you go to f8, that is 2 stops of light. Not 1 stop, 2. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but that's the way it works. And let me tell you, I've been doing this almost all my life, and I still sometimes slip up on it. I still have to stop and think about it. I haven't even memorized the numbers. Like if you look, the numbers right here on this dial, right? 22, 16, 11, 8, 5.6, 4. The numbers are right here on this dial. I don't even have them memorized because it's just so stupid. It really is. But that F4, I'm at F4. And then if I go to 5.6, that's one stop. And then if I go to 8, that's 2 stops. Wait a minute. 4 to 8 is 2 stops, so shouldn't 4 to 6 be 1 stop? No. See, that would be easy. We can't do that. That's no. 5.6 is what's halfway between 4 and 8. Huh? Yeah. You know what's halfway between 8 and 16? Is it 12? No, it's 11. So you can memorize these numbers. And many people do. And let me tell you, I consider them to be geniuses and true photographers when I meet them and they start throwing off, aperture numbers and f-stop numbers. Oh, 5.6, 4.2, 3.2. I love that because no, I can't. What I do is I have my camera set up so that every click is 1/3 of a stop. And I just go click, click, click. That's 1 stop. Click, click, click. That's another stop. I don't really pay that much attention to the number. I just go click, click, click is 1 stop. I know 3 clicks is 1 stop. And if I'm at 4, click, click, click puts me at 5.6. But if I was at 4 and you said, what's 1 stop over 4? I wouldn't be able to quickly go off 5.6 because I've never bothered to what's important is you understand the concept, is that you understand what stopping up and stopping down is. And I hope that I've explained that adequately in this video. This is my longest video so far in this series, and it could probably be twice as long explaining this. I want to say boneheaded, but it's not boneheaded. It's completely scientific and makes perfect sense. It's just hard for us mere mortals to wrap our heads around all of this science and the numbers and pi that go into making aperture numbers and f-stop numbers. But hopefully, go back and watch this video again. Hopefully you got it now. Let me just break it down for you one more time. Aperture numbers, also called f-stop numbers, are a fraction of the size of the opening of the hole in your camera. The numbers get bigger as the hole gets smaller. Every time you double a number, if you go to a bigger number, that is 2 stops of light. A stop of light is twice as much light or half as much light, depending on which way you go. 1 stop. If you let in a stop more of light, you have doubled the amount of light in the camera. Make sense? And on the aperture of your camera, if you double the number, you are 2 stops less light. If you take that number and you go double in the other direction, if you go from 8 to 4, that's 2 stops of light, which is technically 4 times more light. Because the first time it doubles, and the second time it doubles that number. It goes to 2, and then to 4, and then if you do it another stop, now you're at 8. I was trying to make this easier to understand by paraphrasing it, and I probably just made it worse, and I apologize for that. This is the tough one. Go back and watch this video again. Pretty sure I'm saying the same thing the same way every time. Although it's possible I'm not, and you'll fix me in the comments if that's the case. Be sure and check out my podcast. It's called Photobomb. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. Follow me on Instagram, Booray Perry, and join my group on Facebook, Pro Photo Talk with Booray Perry. I'm going to go take a nap, and then I'll be back with another video.